My name is Sarah Miller. I'm 27 years old, and for the past 3 years, I've been raising my sister's 4 children as if they were my own. My dream of opening a boutique bakery had crashed and burned spectacularly, leaving me with a mountain of debt and a shattered spirit. I moved in with my sister Jessica, telling myself it was just a temporary landing pad to get my life back in order. But instead of a fresh start, I found myself locked into the role of an unpaid 24/7 nanny. My days became a monotonous cycle of cooking, cleaning, school runs, and parenting, all while Jess worked night shifts and her boyfriend, Mark, was little more than a phantom in the house. I was desperately trying to balance a part-time job at a local Greasy Spoon diner with late-night web design courses, chasing a future that felt more and more like a distant mirage with each passing day. Then, one evening, she walked in and dropped a bomb right in the center of our already chaotic existence. I'm pregnant again. A fifth child. A cold, heavy dread coiled in the pit of my stomach. I'd already given up everything, my savings, my professional ambitions, my very sense of self, and now another baby. That was the final straw. I was done. I can't keep doing this, I finally choked out, my voice trembling with a rage I had bottled up for years as I escaped to my room. Her face, which had been beaming with joy, hardened into a mask of bitter betrayal. In that single moment, I made a choice. I was moving out. I was finally going to start living for myself. But she wasn't going to let me go without a fight. Her reaction was an explosive eruption of fury, and our lives almost immediately spiraled into total chaos. What happened next would rip our family apart at the seams. If you've ever felt trapped, shouldering the weight of someone else's choices, I want to hear your story in the comments. And while you're down there, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell, because you are not going to believe what she did next. Looking back, every single day I spent in that house felt like I was fighting a losing battle against an unstoppable tide. Chaos was my alarm clock. It would start blaring at 5:30 a.m., and I'd have to physically force myself out of bed, my entire body aching with a bone-deep exhaustion that sleep could never quite fix. The first order of business was always getting the kids ready for the day. My oldest nephew, Ethan, who was 16, was usually already deep in a verbal war with his 13-year-old sister, Olivia, over something completely ridiculous, like who ate the last of the Frosted Flakes. "You finished them yesterday," Olivia would shriek, slamming the pantry door to punctuate her point. I'd have to step in, the unwilling referee, and try to broker peace while 10-year-old Noah would inevitably spill something sticky, like syrup or orange juice, across the counter I had just wiped down. And then there was little Emily, 7 years old, who would be physically attached to my leg, begging me to style her hair in complicated braids right before we were due to leave. I barely had a second to gulp down a cup of lukewarm coffee before I was corralling all 4 of them into my beat-up old sedan. The drive to their various schools was a cacophony of noise. Ethan would have his music blasting from the back, a thumping bass line that made the whole car vibrate. Olivia would be loudly complaining about a pop quiz in algebra. Noah would be launching an endless barrage of questions about everything from black holes to why dogs can't talk, and Emily would be singing a song from a Disney movie, completely and utterly off-key. By the time I dropped off the last kid, a dull, persistent throb had usually taken up residence behind my eyes. From there, I'd race to the diner for my 6-hour shift. It was a thankless, grueling job, spent frothing milk, endlessly refilling coffee mugs, and plastering on a smile for a never-ending parade of grumpy, impatient customers. "Can you speed it up?" A man in a crisp business suit would snap, completely oblivious to the fact that I was already juggling 3 other tables and a coffee machine that was on the fritz. For all of this, I was making $16 an hour, just enough to cover my cell phone bill, car insurance, and gas, with practically nothing left to spare. After my shift was over, the second half of my day would kick in. I'd pick up the kids and we'd drive home to face the next wave of chaos. There was homework that needed to be supervised, and I would often find myself trying to cook dinner while simultaneously breaking up another argument, this time over whose turn it was to walk the dog. My sister Jess and her boyfriend Mark both worked the night shift at a massive distribution warehouse, so she was either asleep when I was awake or simply not there. Our interactions were like ships passing in the night, maybe 10 minutes a day tops. She'd pass me in the hall, mutter a quick, "Thanks for holding down the fort," and then collapse onto the sofa, already checked out from the world. Nights were supposed to be my sanctuary, my only chance to reclaim a small piece of my own life. After I finally got Emily tucked into bed and went over Olivia's homework one last time, I would crack open my laptop to tackle my online web design courses. I had always been the creative type, and before my bakery dream went up in smoke, I loved bringing ideas to life. I dreamed of one day having my own web design agency, a place where I could build sleek, beautiful websites for local businesses. But staring at coding tutorials at 1 o'clock in the morning, my vision blurry with exhaustion, made that dream feel like a distant, taunting ghost. My eyes would burn, and more often than not, I'd drift off in the middle of a video lesson, only to jolt awake an hour later with my cheek stuck to the keyboard and a dead laptop battery. One night, Olivia tiptoed into my room and found me hunched over my desk. She quietly asked why I always looked so tired. "Just trying to build a better future, honey," I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. She wrapped her arms around my neck in a hug that felt both comforting and suffocating at the same time. For a brief second, I felt needed, truly and deeply needed. But then reality came crashing back down. I was needed, but for what? To change diapers, drive carpools, wipe away tears that weren't from my own children, and mediate fights over Pop-Tarts. This wasn't my family. I was just the live-in help. It was around that time that I started to consciously take inventory of just how much of my life I was giving away. Ethan needed rides to soccer practice 3 times a week. Olivia had dance recitals that were absolutely mandatory for me to attend. Noah's science fair project, a ridiculously complicated model of the solar system, was due, and of course, I was the one up at midnight with a hot glue gun, attaching planets to a cardboard sun. Emily's asthma required constant monitoring and frequent trips to the pharmacy. My own life was being completely consumed by theirs. I was draining my personal savings, the meager $3,500 I had managed to salvage from the wreckage of my bakery business, on their school supplies, clothes, and co-pays for doctor appointments. Jess contributed to the rent and bought some of the groceries, but that was the extent of it. Mark, who worked the same hours she did, never offered a single dollar toward the kids' needs. He acted as if they were entirely my responsibility. "You're just so good with them, Sarah," Jess would say, as if she were giving me some great honor. But it wasn't an honor. It was a cage. I was living her life, raising her children, while my own was slowly withering away. One evening, after a particularly draining day, I called my best friend Megan, desperate to vent. "I'm drowning, Meg," I whispered into the phone, pacing back and forth in the small backyard while the kids were inside, captivated by a movie. Megan, who was already running her own successful freelance web design business, was the one person who never tried to sugarcoat things. "You're not their mother, Sarah," she said, her voice firm and clear. "You can't keep putting your own dreams on an indefinite hold for them." Her words were like a splash of ice-cold water. I glanced through the window at my laptop sitting open on the kitchen table, a half-finished coding assignment staring back at me. I realized with a sudden jolt that I hadn't submitted any work in over 2 weeks. My professors were starting to send concerned emails about my missed deadlines. I was falling behind. The kids themselves weren't the problem. I loved their weird, chaotic energy. I loved Ethan's dry, sarcastic sense of humor, Olivia's shy, rare smiles, Noah's insatiable curiosity, and Emily's bone-crushing hugs. In a way, they were my family. But I wasn't their parent. Jess was, and she was a ghost in her own children's lives. Mark was even worse. I'd hear him and Jess laughing in their room, joking about teamwork. But their idea of teamwork was me doing all the work while they enjoyed the benefits of a smoothly running household. I started doing the math in my head. 10 hours a day dedicated to the kids, 6 hours at the diner, and maybe 3 hours for my coursework. That left 5 hours for sleep on a good night. My dream of becoming a full-time designer, of building something for myself, was slipping through my fingers like grains of sand. One night, after comforting Emily, who had cried herself to sleep over a lost stuffed animal, I sat alone in the quiet house, staring at my old sketchbook. I used to fill its pages with bold, intricate designs. Lately, the only thing I'd drawn was stick figures for Emily. I closed the book, a heavy tightness gripping my chest. I wasn't just tired anymore, I was disappearing. Every day I spent raising Jessica's kids was a day I lost another piece of myself. I loved them, but I couldn't keep setting myself on fire to keep them warm. Something had to change, and it had to be soon. About a week later, I was in the middle of folding what felt like the millionth load of laundry when Jess burst through the front door. Her face was lit up by a wide, triumphant grin I hadn't seen in years. Trailing behind her was Mark, carrying a greasy pizza box and wearing a smug expression that made my skin crawl. "We have big news," Jess sang out, her voice sharp with an unfamiliar excitement. She grabbed my hand, yanking me away from the laundry basket and pulling me onto the living room couch. "I'm pregnant," she announced, her eyes sparkling. "A 5th kid, can you believe it?" Mark nodded, plopping the pizza down on the coffee table as if it were a trophy. My jaw went stiff, but I managed to stretch my lips into something that resembled a smile. "Wow, congrats," I muttered, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. Inside, my world was spinning out of control. Another child. I was already stretched so thin I felt transparent. And here they were, acting as if I should be celebrating this new burden they were creating. That night, as we all sat around the dinner table picking at the celebratory pizza, Jess dropped the real bombshell. "So Mark and I have been talking," she began, shooting a quick glance at Mark, who leaned back in his chair with a self-satisfied smirk. "You're so amazing with the kids, Sarah." "We were thinking, we really need you to step up a bit more. Maybe you could quit the diner job to focus on them full time." I froze, a slice of pizza halfway to my mouth. "Quit my job?" I repeated, my voice dangerously low. Mark just shrugged. "Yeah, I mean, we're swamped at the warehouse. And with a new baby on the way, we just won't be able to handle it all." Jess quickly chimed in. "Plus, money's going to be really tight. We were thinking you could start chipping in, like $400 a month for rent. It's only fair, since you're living here and all." My heart started hammering against my ribs. $400? I was barely making ends meet as it was, and most of my savings were already being funneled into her kids' expenses. I tried to keep my composure. "I'm already doing everything," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "The school runs, the cooking, the homework, all of it. I can't quit my job." Jessica's eyes narrowed into thin slits. "You're here, eating our food, using our electricity. You owe us," Mark added, his tone casual and dismissive. "Look, it's just temporary. We'll figure something else out after the baby comes." That word, temporary, made my blood boil. I had been their temporary solution for 3 long years. I shoved my plate away and stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I need to think about this," I said, and walked out of the room before I could say something I'd truly regret. The very next day, as soon as the kids were safely at school, I called Megan. "They want me to quit my job and start paying them rent," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "They're acting like I'm their live-in maid who should be paying for the privilege of serving them." Megan didn't hesitate for a second. "They're using you, Sarah." "It's exploitation, plain and simple. You are not their employee. What about your web design courses? What about your entire future?" Her words were sharp, but they were the truth I desperately needed to hear. I'd been so consumed with keeping their dysfunctional family afloat that I had completely forgotten about my own lifeboat. I hung up the phone and stared at my laptop, where that same unfinished project was still waiting, a digital monument to my stalled ambitions. I was falling further and further behind, and for what? To play make-believe mom for my sister's ever-expanding family. Over the next few days, Jess and Mark kept up the pressure. "Think about the kids," Jess would say one morning, as she handed me a new, longer list of chores that now included extra grocery runs, scheduling doctor's appointments for Emily's asthma, and paying Ethan's soccer fees. Mark even had the audacity to suggest I sell my old cake decorating equipment, the last physical remnants of my former dream, to help out with their finances. I wanted to scream. They weren't asking for help anymore. They were demanding my complete and total surrender. I started seeing their behavior with a painful new clarity. Jess would conveniently sleep through the kids' morning arguments, leaving me to be the mediator. Mark would come home from work, grab a beer, and lounge on the couch with Jess while I was in the kitchen cooking a meal for 6. To them, I had become invisible, nothing more than a convenient tool to make their lives easier. One evening, Ethan found me packing up my laptop after a late-night study session. "You okay?" he asked, his usual teenage sarcasm replaced with genuine concern. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest. "I'm trying to be," I admitted. He just nodded, and in that simple gesture, I felt like he understood more than he let on. The kids weren't oblivious. They saw how much I was doing. But Jess and Mark? They acted as if it were my sacred duty. I went to bed that night with my mind racing. I couldn't sustain this. My savings were disappearing, my grades were slipping, and my dream of being a designer was fading into a distant memory. I had to get out. It wasn't just for my own sake anymore. I had to show the kids that you don't let people walk all over you, not even family. My fingers trembled as I started searching for rental listings online. $400 a month? I'd much rather spend that on a place of my own. I was not their servant, and I was done letting them treat me like one. The following evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table helping Olivia with her history homework when Jess stormed into the room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "We need to talk," she snapped, her voice cutting through the relative quiet of the house. I carefully set down the textbook, steeling myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. "What's up?" I asked, deliberately keeping my tone neutral. Jess didn't bother with pleasantries. "You're not pulling your weight, Sarah." "I asked you to step up, and you're still wasting your time at that stupid diner. It's irresponsible." My breath caught in my throat. Irresponsible? I had been single-handedly running her household for 3 years. "I'm doing everything I can," I said, a sharp edge creeping into my voice. "I cook, I clean, I drive your kids everywhere, every single day." Jess just rolled her eyes. "That's the bare minimum. With the baby coming, we need you here, not off chasing some pointless hobby degree." I pushed my chair back and stood up, the legs scraping against the linoleum. "My web design classes are not a hobby. They're my future." Jess let out a cold, bitter laugh. "Your future? You're nearly 30, living in my house and eating my food. You think you're too good for us now, is that it?" Her words were like a physical blow. I wanted to fire back, to list every single sacrifice I'd made for her, but then I saw Olivia watching us, her eyes wide with fear. I took a deep, steadying breath. "I'm not your servant, Jess. I've given you 3 years of my life." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a low, threatening hiss. "Well, if you're not all in, then maybe you shouldn't be here at all." I froze. Was she actually kicking me out? Before I could even process the threat, she spun on her heel and stalked out of the room, leaving me shaking with a white-hot fury. I immediately grabbed my phone and paced around the backyard while I called Megan. "She called me irresponsible," I seethed, my voice tight. "She honestly thinks I owe her my entire life." Megan's voice was a calm, firm anchor in my storm. "Sarah, you have to set a boundary, a real one. You are not her employee, and you are not their mother. You deserve your own space, your own goals, your own life. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I know, but the kids, they need me. Megan cut me off. They need their mother to be a mother. They don't need you to sacrifice everything for them. Find a place of your own. You still have some savings, right? Her words ignited a spark of defiance in me. I'd been so focused on reacting to Jessica's insane demands that I hadn't seriously considered what I could do for myself. That night, I didn't even try to study. Instead, I opened my laptop and started seriously searching for apartments in Riverton. I found a few promising listings, small studio apartments downtown that were around $1,400 a month. My savings, that precious $3,500 from my failed business, would be just enough to cover a security deposit and the first month's rent. I'd have to keep the diner job, maybe even pick up extra shifts to make it work. My heart was pounding with a terrifying mix of fear and exhilaration as I started crunching the numbers. I could do this. I had to. But every time I felt a surge of hope, the kids' faces would flash in my mind. Ethan's quiet, worried expression, Olivia's shy hugs, Noah's endless stream of chatter, Emily's small, clingy hands. Leaving them would feel like a betrayal, but staying meant the slow, certain death of my own spirit. The next day, after dropping the kids at school, I sat Ethan down. "I'm thinking about getting my own place," I said gently, watching his face for a reaction. He immediately frowned, picking at a loose thread on his hoodie. "Because of Mom?" he asked, his voice flat. I just nodded. "I need to live my own life too, Ethan. But I'll still be here for you guys, just in a different way." He didn't say much else, but I could see the gears turning in his head. That evening, I created a detailed budget: $1,400 for rent, $500 for utilities and groceries, $200 for my classes, my diner pay, $16 an hour for about 30 hours a week, would just barely cover it if I was extremely frugal. That meant no new clothes, no eating out, no extras of any kind. Jess noticed my new sense of detachment over the next couple of days. "You're acting weird," she said one morning, catching me scrolling through apartment listings on my phone. I didn't even look up from the screen. "Just making some plans," I said, my voice deliberately flat. She scoffed. "Planning to bail on us. Typical." Her words were meant to sting, but I refused to take the bait. I was done fighting with her on her terms. Megan texted me later that day, just checking in. "You're doing the right thing," she wrote. "Don't let her guilt you into staying." I held on to that message like a lifeline. I had to break free. I wasn't just leaving a house, I was reclaiming my life. By the end of the week, I had a list of 3 apartments I wanted to visit and a concrete plan to make it happen, no matter what fresh hell Jess decided to unleash on me next. A few days later, I snuck out after the school drop-off to see the first apartment on my list. The studio was small, basically just one room with a tiny kitchenette tucked into a corner. But as I stood in the empty space, I could already imagine it as my own, a place where I could breathe, work on my designs, and just be me. The landlord quoted me $1,400 a month, plus a deposit. I nodded, my hand clutching my phone, where I had screenshots of 2 other listings saved. My $3,500 in savings would be just enough to cover the move, but my budget would be razor thin. Back at Jessica's house, I kept my plans a secret, avoiding her suspicious glares and pointed comments. I wasn't ready for another blowout fight, not yet. Instead, I poured my energy into preparing the kids, starting with Ethan. After dinner one night, I pulled him aside while Olivia was helping Noah with a puzzle. "Ethan, we need to talk," I said, handing him a notebook and a pen. "If I move out, you're going to need to step up and help more." His eyes immediately flashed with anger. "So you're really leaving us because of her, aren't you?" he snapped, throwing the notebook onto the table. I kept my voice steady and calm. "I'm not leaving you. I'm teaching you how to be more self-sufficient." I walked him through how to make a simple grocery list, how to plan easy meals like tacos or pasta, and how to check the level on Emily's asthma inhaler. He grumbled and complained, but he also listened, scribbling down notes. "You're 16, I told him. You're a smart kid. You can handle this." His jaw was tight, but he didn't argue. Olivia must have overheard us because she cornered me in the hallway later that night, her voice barely a whisper. "Are you moving out because we're too much trouble?" she asked, nervously twisting a strand of her hair. My heart broke a little. "No, sweetie, of course not. It's not you. I need my own space to grow." She threw her arms around me and buried her face in my shoulder, and I could feel her quiet sobs. I held her tight, promising I'd always be close by. Noah and Emily were harder to explain things to. At 10 and 7, they couldn't fully grasp the situation. Over breakfast, I told them I might be living in a different house soon. Noah frowned, stirring his cereal into a soggy mush. "But who's going to help me with my science project?" he asked. Emily's lower lip began to tremble. "Will you still do my hair in braids?" she whispered. I reassured them both that I would still visit and call all the time, but I could see the confusion and fear in their eyes. I spent the next few days visiting the other apartments on my list. One had a great view of a park, and another was closer to the diner. I finally settled on the first one I'd seen, the small but promising studio, and started calculating the costs over and over in my head. My job would bring in around $1,900 a month if I took extra shifts. It would be enough for rent, utilities, and food, as long as I was careful. I'd have to pause my web design classes for a month or two just to build up a small financial cushion, but I could always pick them up again. When I told Megan I'd found a place, she was ecstatic. "You're taking control, Sarah," she cheered over the phone. "The kids will be okay. You're showing them what it means to be strong." Her words gave me a much-needed boost of confidence, but the kids' sad faces weighed heavily on me. One evening, I was teaching Ethan how to use the washing machine. "Don't overload it like this," I said, showing him how to measure the detergent. He rolled his eyes, but I could see he was paying attention. "Mom never does any of this," he muttered under his breath. I just nodded, deciding to keep quiet. It was clear that Ethan was starting to see his mother's neglect for what it was, and it was hurting him more than he would ever admit. Olivia started sticking closer to me, helping Emily with her bedtime stories, but her eyes were often red and puffy. Noah kept asking when I would come visit my new house, and Emily seemed to be permanently attached to my side, whispering, "Don't go too far away." I felt like I was being torn in two, but I knew I couldn't back down now. By the end of the week, I had an appointment scheduled to sign the lease. I packed a small bag with my laptop, my chargers, and a few of my sketchbooks, keeping it hidden in the back of my closet. Jess was so wrapped up in her own world, complaining about her pregnancy and spending time with Mark, that she hadn't noticed a thing. I told the kids I'd be moving out soon, but I promised to call them every day and visit as often as I could. Ethan's anger had softened into a grudging acceptance. Olivia gave me a drawing she'd made of the two of us, her silent way of saying she would miss me. Noah and Emily still seemed lost, but I had to hope that they would understand someday. I wasn't abandoning them. I was teaching them a lesson I'd learned far too late: how to stand up for yourself. As I finalized my plans, I felt a flicker of real hope for the first time in years. I was ready to take this step, even if it meant I had to face whatever came next completely on my own. The following week, I hauled the last box of my meager belongings into my new studio apartment. The room was small and echoed with emptiness, furnished with nothing but a mattress on the floor and a cheap folding desk, but it was mine. It was my own quiet space, a true fresh start. I set up my laptop and arranged my sketchbooks on the desk, feeling a sense of lightness I hadn't experienced in years. I sent a quick group text to Ethan, Olivia, and Noah, promising a pizza night at my new place very soon. Jess hadn't spoken a single word to me since I signed the lease, and honestly, her cold shoulder was a welcome relief after months of escalating tension. I foolishly thought I had finally escaped the drama. I had severely underestimated my sister. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "This is Officer Doyle with the Riverton Police Department," a calm, steady voice said on the other end. My stomach instantly plummeted. "We've received a complaint. We need you to meet us at your sister's address." I drove over, my mind racing through a dozen worst-case scenarios. When I pulled up to the house, 2 police officers were waiting outside. Officer Doyle, a man with a clipboard and a weary expression, and his partner, Officer Reed, who was scanning the street. Jess was standing on the porch, her face flushed and contorted with rage. "She stole $500 from me and trashed the place," Jess shrieked the moment she saw me, jabbing an accusatory finger in my direction. "The washing machine is broken and she ripped the sofa." I just blinked, completely stunned. "I didn't take anything," I said, my voice firm despite the shaking in my hands. "I left the house perfectly clean." Officer Doyle raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Let's go inside and take a look at this alleged damage," he said. Jess led us into the living room, dramatically pointing to a tear in one of the sofa cushions and then to the washing machine in the laundry nook. "She did all this right before she left," Jess insisted, her voice thick with fake tears. I just shook my head. "I haven't touched any of your things." "I've been at my new apartment all week." Officer Reed knelt down to examine the sofa. He noted the old, faded stains underneath the fresh tear. "This damage doesn't look very recent," he commented dryly. Then he went to the washing machine and found a loose wire in the back. "This could just be normal wear and tear," he added. I turned to face my sister. "Jess, you know I didn't steal any money. You can search my car. You can search my apartment. Go ahead." Officer Doyle looked directly at Jess. "You're making some serious claims here, ma'am. Do you have any actual proof of theft or vandalism?" Jess hesitated, her eyes darting around the room. "The money, it was in my dresser drawer," she stammered. She knew where I kept it. Before I could defend myself, Ethan appeared in the doorway, his face tense. "I need to say something," he said, his eyes fixed on the officers. My heart started pounding in my chest. What was he about to do? Ethan stepped forward and faced Officer Doyle directly. "My mom is making all of this up," he said, his voice clear and unwavering. "That tear in the sofa has been there for months. Noah spilled a whole bottle of juice on it last summer. The washing machine broke 2 weeks ago because my mom overloaded it with a giant pile of towels. And the money? She spent it on a new TV and told Dad she'd just say you took it." Jessica's eyes widened in horror. "Ethan, that's enough," she snapped, but her voice was trembling. Ethan didn't back down an inch. "Sarah has been more of a parent to us than you have ever been. She paid for our school clothes, she drove us everywhere, and she helped us with our homework, all while you and Mark were never even here." I just stared at him, a huge lump forming in my throat. Officer Reed was jotting down notes, his expression completely neutral. "So, just to be clear, there was no theft and no recent damage?" he asked Ethan. "None," Ethan confirmed, crossing his arms over his chest. "My mom is just angry that Sarah finally moved out and she has to be a parent now." Jessica's face turned a deep shade of crimson, but for once she was completely silent. Officer Doyle let out a long, tired sigh. "Ma'am, filing a false police report is a serious offense. We're going to let this go with a warning this time, but I suggest you don't call us again unless there's a real emergency." The officers gave me a sympathetic nod and then left. I pulled Ethan aside in the driveway as soon as they were gone. "You didn't have to do that," I said, my voice soft. He just shrugged, kicking at a loose pebble on the ground. "You don't deserve to be treated like that. You've always been there for us." I pulled him into a hug, fighting back tears. Back at my studio, I immediately called Megan, still rattled from the whole ordeal. "Jess tried to have me arrested for theft and vandalism," I said, pacing back and forth in my tiny apartment. "Ethan set the record straight, but I'm completely done with her games." Megan's voice was sharp. "She's lashing out because she's losing her grip on you. You need to keep your distance, Sarah, for real this time." I agreed, looking around at my bare, simple apartment. It wasn't much, but it was a sanctuary, a place free from Jessica's lies and manipulation. That evening, I texted Olivia to check in. She sent me a photo of her latest drawing. Noah asked when he could come visit, and Emily begged me to tell her a bedtime story over the phone. I promised I'd see them all soon, but Jessica's stunt had changed everything. Ethan's words kept replaying in my mind. She has to be a parent now. The kids deserve so much better than what she was giving them, and I couldn't keep protecting her from the consequences of her own failures. I sat down at my desk and started sketching out a new logo idea, my hands steady for the first time in what felt like forever. Jess could try to sabotage me, but I was building a new life for myself, and no one was going to take that away from me. 2 weeks later, my phone lit up with a call from Ethan. His voice was frantic and shaky. "Mom's in the hospital," he said, the words tumbling out. "Something's wrong with the pregnancy." The kids are all freaking out. I froze, my coffee mug halfway to my lips. Despite everything, the lies, the accusations, the attempt to have me arrested, my first thought was of the kids. I pictured Olivia's tear-stained face, Emily's confusion, Noah's anxiety. They didn't deserve any of this. I jumped in my car and drove to the hospital, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. A kind-faced doctor, Dr. Patel, met me in the waiting room. "Your sister has placenta previa," she explained calmly. "It's a serious condition. She's going to need to be on complete bed rest, possibly until she delivers." My chest tightened. That could be up to 3 months. I found Jess in her hospital room, looking pale and small against the white sheets, a stark contrast to her usual fiery demeanor. "The kids need you," she whispered, barely able to meet my gaze. A part of me, the part that had been so deeply wounded, wanted to turn around and walk away. But then I heard Ethan's panicked voice in my head. "I'll help," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "But this time, it's on my terms. This is only for the kids." Jess frowned, but I didn't let her interrupt. "I am keeping my job, and I am keeping my apartment. I am not giving you a single dime. I will help out for 3 months, and that's it. After that, you're on your own." She just nodded, too weak and tired to argue. I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing it for Ethan, Olivia, Noah, and Emily. When I got back to the house, it was pure chaos. Olivia clung to me, whispering, "Is Mom going to be okay?" I hugged her and promised that Dr. Patel was taking excellent care of her. Noah kept asking where Mark was, and Emily refused to go to sleep unless I was sitting right beside her bed. Ethan was trying to put on a brave face, but his clenched fists betrayed his fear. The house looked like a tornado had torn through it. Dishes were piled high in the sink, laundry was overflowing from every basket, and school papers were scattered across the floor. And Mark was nowhere to be found. His shifts at the warehouse suddenly seemed to be stretching longer and longer. When I finally did see him, he barely grunted a hello before grabbing a beer from the fridge and disappearing into the garage. "He's been like this ever since Mom got sick," Ethan muttered. I took a deep breath and took charge, but not like before. I sat Ethan and Olivia down and showed them how to create a chore chart. "You're a team now," I told them, assigning dishes to Olivia and laundry to Ethan. Noah and Emily were given simpler tasks, like tidying their own rooms. I stuck to my conditions rigidly. I would drive over after my dinner shift, cook dinner, and help with homework, but I refused to sleep over. Each night I drove back to the peace and quiet of my own studio. One evening, Olivia asked, "Why can't you just stay here with us?" I knelt down beside her. "I'm always here for you, sweetie, but I need to have my own place too." She nodded, but her eyes were filled with a sadness that I couldn't fix. Mark's growing absence made everything 100 times harder. He'd come home late, reeking of alcohol, and barely acknowledged the children. One night, I found Emily sobbing in her room because he had promised to come to her school play and never showed up. "He said he'd be there," she cried. I held her, my anger at Mark simmering just below the surface. Ethan overheard and scoffed. "He's checked out," he said with a bitter finality. "He always has been." I didn't argue because he was right. This family was unraveling, and I knew I couldn't be the one to stitch it back together. All I could do was keep the kids stable, make sure they were fed, safe, and felt some semblance of normalcy. Megan called one afternoon while I was helping Noah with his math homework. "You're doing too much again, Sarah," she warned. "Don't let them suck you back into their vortex." I sighed, looking at Noah's focused expression as he worked through a difficult problem. "It's just for 3 months, Megan. Just for the kids. I have boundaries this time." Megan wasn't convinced. "Just watch your back with Jess. The second she's out of that hospital, she's going to start leaning on you again." I knew she was right, but then I'd look at the kids' faces and my resolve would waver. I wasn't their mom, but I couldn't just stand by and watch them fall apart. By the second month, we had all settled into a strange new routine. I'd work my shift, then head to the house to help the kids, then retreat to my studio for a few hours apiece. Jess would call sometimes from the hospital, asking for updates, but I kept the conversations brief and to the point. Mark's absence became a permanent fixture. He'd mumble excuses about overtime, but he never pitched in, financially or otherwise. Ethan really stepped up, handling grocery runs on his bike and learning how to calm Emily down from her nightmares. But I could see the strain taking its toll on him. One night, he admitted, "I'm scared for Mom, but I'm also really mad at her. She's never really here, even when she's not sick." I just nodded, my heart aching for the weight he was carrying. I knew I couldn't stay forever, but for now, I would be the glue that held them all together. As I drove home each night with my sketchbook and my dreams waiting for me on my desk, I felt a quiet sense of purpose. I was helping, but I was no longer losing myself. 3 months later to the day, Jess was discharged from the hospital with her new baby boy. I had kept my promise. I had seen the kids through the crisis, but now I was done. I met her at the house one last time, my resolve as solid as steel. "I'm out," I said, standing in the middle of her messy kitchen. "I love the kids, but I can't be a part of this dysfunction anymore." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "So you're just abandoning us again?" she snapped. I shook my head. "I've given enough, Jess. You're their mother. It's time for you to step up." She didn't have a response. She just turned her back on me, and that was it. I walked out the door and didn't look back, finally cutting the cord for good. I couldn't leave the kids in a lurch, though. They deserved better than the mess their parents had created. I called Megan, who thankfully lived much closer to them. "Can you be my lifeline to them?" I asked. She agreed without a moment's hesitation. I started sending her $50 a month from my diner paycheck, a small amount designated for school supplies or a pizza night for the kids. Megan set up video calls for us twice a week. I'd help Ethan with his pre-calculus homework and edit Olivia's English essays. Noah loved showing me his latest science experiments, and Emily would chatter away about her new drawings. It wasn't the same as being there, but it allowed us to stay connected without me getting dragged back into Jessica's chaos. Word started to filter back to me through Megan that Jessica's life was quickly falling apart. The call center where she'd been working let her go due to too many missed shifts during her recovery. One night, Mark packed a bag and just left. No note, no explanation. He was just gone. Ethan told Megan that their neighbors had stopped coming around, tired of Jessica's constant drama and excuses. The kids were clearly struggling, but I couldn't fix their parents for them. I focused on what I could do, sending a little money, checking in through Megan, and encouraging Ethan to keep the younger ones on track. It stung to hear the crack in Olivia's voice during our calls, but I knew that staying away from Jess was the only way I could protect my own sanity. In the meantime, I threw myself into my freelance work. I had re-enrolled in my web design classes, and a classmate connected me with a small online boutique that needed a new logo. That one small job led to another, and then to a full website redesign for a local cafe. By the end of the month, I had 3 steady clients, which was enough for me to finally quit the diner. I spent my days sketching, coding, and pitching ideas to new clients. My tiny studio was now covered in mood boards and color swatches. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was building something real, something that was entirely mine. A client paid me $500 for a branding package, and I nearly cried. It was more than I had made in a whole week at the diner. Megan kept me updated on the kids, but she also warned me about Jess. "She's been asking about you," Megan said during one of our calls. "She says you owe her for all the help she gave you." I let out a bitter laugh. She can't guilt me anymore. I had learned my lesson the hard way. I told Megan to keep my new number private and to only pass on messages that came directly from the kids. One night, Ethan texted me to say that Jess was having trouble paying the bills. I sent Megan an extra $50 to buy them groceries, but I made a point not to reach out to Jess directly. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. The kids were my focus, even from a distance. I mailed Olivia a brand new sketchbook for her birthday, and a week later I received a drawing from her of the two of us, labeled Best Aunt Ever. Noah called me ecstatic to tell me he'd won first place at the district science fair, and I cheered for him through the phone. Emily still asked for bedtime stories, her voice always a little brighter when I made up silly endings just for her. Ethan was quieter, carrying a burden far too heavy for a 17-year-old. "Mom's not even trying anymore," he admitted to me once. I told him to just focus on school, and I promised him I would always be there for him, just not in Jessica's house. As my freelance business grew, I landed a major contract with a tech startup in Riverton to design their entire marketing campaign. It was grueling work, late nights, endless revisions, but it paid enough for me to not only cover my rent, but to start saving again. I wasn't rich, but I was independent. I was free. Jessica's world was crumbling, and a small part of me still felt the weight of her downfall, but I knew I couldn't carry her anymore. The kids had Megan nearby, and they had me, in the ways that truly mattered. I looked at the sleek, modern design glowing on my laptop screen and felt a surge of pride that was deep and true. I had built this life from the ashes of another, and no one could ever take it away from me. End of story.